My hands trembled as I opened the camera app on my desktop. The window popped up, showing my basement studio. The gray concrete walls, the stacks of hard drives, the empty coffee cups, and me, pale, unshaven, eyes wide with panic. The image was crisp, HD, real time. I scanned the room on the screen. The corners were clear. The ceiling was clear. I sighed, a ragged sound that cracked in the dry air. "Get a grip," I muttered. "You've been staring at screens too long. It's pareidolia. It's burnout." I reached for the mouse to close the window. That's when I saw the reflection in my own eyes on the screen. The resolution was high enough that I could see the reflection of the monitors in my pupils. And in that tiny, reflected image of the screens, there was something standing behind me. I spun around in my chair. The room was empty, just dust motes dancing in the blue light of the monitors. The server rack hummed. The air conditioner cycled on with a clunk. I turned back to the screen. The figure was still there in the video feed. It was standing directly behind my chair. It wasn't a glitch anymore. It was fully rendered. A tall, impossible construct of vantablack limbs, a mannequin made of voids. It had no face, only a smooth, concave surface where a head should be. And it was leaning down, its long fingers resting on my shoulders. I couldn't feel them. I looked down at my own body. I touched my shoulder. I felt nothing but my t-shirt. I looked back at the screen. The fingers were digging in. My digital avatar's shirt was rippling under the pressure. That's when I understood. It doesn't exist in the physical world. It exists in the image. It lives in the rendering. And I am currently being rendered. I am transmitted through the lens of the webcam, processed by the CPU, and displayed on the monitor. In the ecosystem of the screen, I am the prey. I reached for the USB cable to unplug the webcam. My hand on the screen moved to follow, but the black hand on my shoulder tightened. I felt a sudden, sharp pain, not in my shoulder, in the image of my shoulder. I gasped, clutching my arm. The pain was searing, digital, abstract, yet agonizingly real. It was as if my nervous system had extended into the silicon. The entity on the screen twisted its grip. I watched, helpless, as my digital arms snapped at an impossible angle. A scream tore from my throat, echoing in the basement. My physical arm fell uselessly to my side, numb, paralyzed. I wasn't injured physically. There was no bruise, no break. But the data representing my arm had been corrupted, and my brain could no longer access the limb. It was deleting me. It wasn't just haunting the archives. It was editing the present. It was cropping me out of reality, pixel by pixel. I tried to stand up, to run, but my legs on the screen were suddenly engulfed in that familiar black static. I fell to the floor, my physical legs instantly dead, heavy as lead. I dragged myself backward with my one good arm, gasping, staring up at the desk. The monitors towered above me like monoliths. On the center screen, the feed continued. The entity stepped over my crawling form. It didn't walk. It glitched forward, teleporting in jagged frames. It loomed over the camera lens, filling the frame. Then it did something worse than attacking. It looked at the lens. The concave face shifted. A hole opened in the center of the void. An eye. But it wasn't looking at my digital avatar anymore. It was looking through the camera. It was looking out. It was looking at me, lying on the floor. And then it began to type. My keyboard, sitting on the desk above me, began to clack. I watched in horror as the keys depressed by themselves, driven by invisible, long fingers. On the screen, a text editor opened over the video feed. "File corrupted," it typed. "Initiating purge." My vision began to blur. Not like fainting. It was pixelating. The edges of my peripheral vision were turning into blocky, low-res squares. The sound of the room, the hum of the servers, the air conditioner, began to compress, turning into a metallic, bit-crushed screech. I am losing resolution. The details of the room are smoothing out, losing texture. The concrete floor feels smooth, frictionless, like unrendered geometry. I have to warn you, If you are reading this, you are looking at a screen. You are observing a rendering of data. You have opened the door. Don't look at the background of your photos. Don't look too closely at the shadows in your videos. Don't boost the brightness. You are making it clearer. You are giving it a path. My fingers are numb. I can barely feel the keys as I type this last entry on my phone. The blockiness is spreading up my chest. My heart is beating in 8-bit stutters. I am becoming a bad file. I am becoming static. The monitor above me is the last thing I see. The entity has turned away from the camera. It is looking at something else now. It is looking at the metadata of the next viewer. It is looking at you. The pixels are taking my eyes now. The world is flat. The dark is total. End of stream. The silence of a basement studio is heavy, a physical weight that presses against the eardrums. I have spent the better part of a decade buried here, subterranean and solitary, illuminated only by the cold, sterile glow of 3 high-definition monitors. My profession is nostalgia, technically speaking. I am a digital archivist. Clients send me their decaying histories, moldy VHS tapes, brittle Super 8 reels, scratched DVDs, and I resurrect them. I scrub away the static, color-correct the faded summers of 1985, and upscale blurry wedding toasts into crisp, 4,000 resolution. It is tedious, surgical work, but I enjoy the voyeurism. I am the invisible guest at 1,000 birthday parties, the silent observer of 1,000 first steps. I thought I had seen every possible way a memory could degrade. I was wrong. It began on a Tuesday, deep in the graveyard shift, with a reel of 16 film from a client named Mr. Vance. The footage was standard fare, a family picnic in the Cotswolds, circa 1963. The colors were washed out, the frame jittery. I was running my usual stabilization algorithms when I noticed the artifact. It was a cluster of dead pixels, a jagged vantablack tear in the upper right quadrant of the frame, hovering just above a weeping willow. At first, I assumed it was a sensor error on my end. I dragged the playback window to my secondary monitor. The black mark followed the footage, not the screen. It was baked into the digital file. I frowned, leaning in, my nose nearly touching the glass. It didn't look like film rot, which is organic and fungal, nor did it look like digital corruption, which is usually blocky and colorful. This was a void, an absolute absence of data. It absorbed the light around it, a sinkhole in the image. I applied a content-aware fill tool, attempting to clone the sky over the blemish. The software crashed instantly. That was rare. My rig was built to handle terabytes of raw video without stuttering. I rebooted, annoyed, and reopened the project. The black mark was still there. But when I scrubbed through the timeline, I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine. In the first 10 seconds of the clip, the mark was near the tree. By the 20-second mark, it had shifted. It hadn't moved with the camera pan, it had moved independently. It was drifting downward, toward the family eating sandwiches on the checkered blanket. I isolated the cluster, zoomed in to 800%, and ramped up the exposure. Usually, blowing out the brightness reveals hidden grain or compression artifacts. Here, there was nothing. It remained a perfect, lightless silhouette, but at this magnification, the edges were clearer. It wasn't a smudge. It was a shape. It looked like a hand. A long, emaciated hand with too many fingers, reaching down from the sky. I rubbed my eyes, blaming the lack of sleep. I marked the timestamp, rendered the file with the glitch intact. Vance probably wouldn't even notice, and moved on to the next job in the queue. The next job was digital. An SD card from a GoPro, found in a box of junk by a widow whose husband had died in a climbing accident 3 years ago. The footage was shaky, high adrenaline stuff, a snowy ridge in the Andes. The wind roared in the audio channels. I was stabilizing the horizon line when my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There, in the periphery of the wide-angle lens, against the blinding white of the snow, was the mark. It was identical, the same jagged edges, the same impossible darkness. I froze. This was impossible. The previous footage was chemical film from 1963. This was digital data from 2021. There was no shared medium, no common equipment. The only variable connecting them was me, my equipment, my software. "It's a virus," I whispered to the empty room. "Some kind of overlay glitch in the rendering engine." I frantically opened a third project, a random file from my backlog. A wedding video from 1998, shot on a bulky camcorder. I fast-forwarded to the reception. The bride was dancing with her father. The lighting was dim, warm, and grainy. I didn't see it at first. I scanned the corners, the ceiling, the floor. Nothing. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I must have been hallucinating, or perhaps I had fixed the bug. Then the bride turned. On her back, clinging to the white lace of her dress like a parasite, was the black patch. I recoiled, my chair screeching against the concrete floor. It was smaller here, compressed by the low resolution, but the shape was undeniable. It wasn't just a hand this time. It was a cluster of limbs, a tangled knot of shadow that seemed to be burrowing into the fabric of the dress. And the bride? She was laughing, oblivious, but in the frames where the anomaly touched her, the video stuttered. The audio dropped out, replaced by a low, wet thrumming sound, like a heartbeat viewed through an ultrasound. I spent the next 6 hours in a fever state. I pulled up every file I had worked on in the last month. A sweet 16. A graduation. A retirement party. It was in all of them. Once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. In the 1950s reels, it was a shadow under a park bench. In the 1980s VHS tapes, it was a figure standing in a doorway, blurred by static. In the 4,000 clips from last week, it was sharp, defined, and terrifyingly close to the subjects. I realized with dawning horror that this wasn't a technical glitch. It was a presence. Something that existed in the margins of human history, unnoticed until we built machines capable of capturing it. We had spent a century perfecting the resolution of our memories, sharpening the image until we accidentally resolved the things that hide in the noise. But the pattern was the worst part. I lined up the footage chronologically on my screens, creating a timeline of the entity. 1963, it is in the sky, distant. 1975, it is in the background, a face in the crowd. 1988, it is in the middle distance, watching. 1999, it is touching the subjects. 2015, it is obscuring them. The anomaly was getting closer, not just in space, but in time. It was moving through the recorded media of the human race, swimming upstream toward the present. I grabbed a hard drive from my completed stack, a project I had finished just yesterday. A simple vlog from a travel influencer shot in Tokyo. I loaded it. The video started. The girl was smiling, holding a coffee in Shibuya Crossing. The entire background was black, not night. The pixels were gone. The anomaly had eaten the world behind her. She was floating in a void, chatting cheerfully about matcha, while the darkness boiled around her silhouette. And then I saw it. The darkness wasn't empty. It was teeming. Millions of those long, multi-jointed fingers were writhing, reaching for her, stroking her hair, caressing her face. She didn't feel them. She was a recording. She was safe in the past. But I was here. A thought struck me, cold and piercing as an ice pick. If it moves through media, if it travels through the act of observation. I looked at my webcam. It was perched atop the center monitor, its small green LED dark. I never used it. I was a recluse. But it was connected. It was a lens.